Welcome to this webinar. It's great to have so many of you with us today as we ask the question, executive coaching, is it worth it? Well, as you can imagine, given what we do, we definitely think so. And to illustrate exactly why we think so, we're going to share a story today. And our story is one of how an investment of under £10,000 resulted in some massive personal and business impacts for the organisation in question, which we'll come to shortly. So in monetary terms, we were talking savings in excess of 7 figures. And whilst it's harder to quantify in monetary terms, the unlocking of previously undiscovered talent, which was very valuable to the organisation. So we fundamentally believe you should know what you're using coaching for and how that will deliver strategic and business value and be able to tell that you've achieved it. So as Laura has already said, my name is Lisa Williams. I'm responsible for coaching at the Oxford Group. And for those of you who may be on a webinar with us for the first time or new to the Oxford Group, just a very brief introduction to who we are. We are a global business specialising in executive coaching, leadership and management development. And as you can see there, we've 25 years plus of working with some of the world's leading and most respected organisations, some of the logos that you see on your screen there, including QBE, who we'll come on to momentarily. So that's all I want to say about the Oxford Group. In terms of what we hope and plan to cover today, there are just 3 things. Firstly, how successful measurement can be seamlessly woven into the fabric of coaching right from the beginning, and we'll be sharing some tools and techniques that we hope you'll find of use in your own organisations, and how our story will illustrate that far from detracting from the coaching impact, it actually adds to the coaching experience. And finally, we'll look at the return on investment that can be derived and how we captured and reflected this in terms of this story, but how that illustrates what we do as a whole. So I'm delighted not to be alone this afternoon. I've got 2 people joining me, I hope. The first of these is one of our executive coach team, Gregor, and the second is his one-time coachee, Joe Dainty. So, Gregor, I'm just going to say a few words to introduce you, and then I hope that you'll be on the line. So Gregor has been an executive coach with us for several years, and in the past has many years' experience of working as a senior leader in both large multinationals through to startup ventures. So, Gregor, I'm hoping to hear your dulcet tones on the line. Are you there?
I wouldn't call them dulcet, but I'm here. I'm very happy.
Oh, it's always such a relief when I hear the voice that's supposed to be there. And I'm equally pleased to be joined by Joe. Joe Dainty is Head of Operations for European Markets. And Joe, I know that you worked with Gregor a while ago, and I asked you to kind of reprise all of that work for us. I'm really grateful that you have. And I'll get you to say a bit more about yourself and QBE and what you wanted and what you achieved in just a moment. But first of all, I just need to make sure you're there too.
Hello, Lisa. Yeah, glad to be here as well.
I heard the momentary pause just to keep me on my toes then.
Oh, that's exactly what it was for.
I thought so. Fantastic. So it's lovely to have you both with me, and I'll get the luxury of asking you both a number of questions which will illuminate and illustrate our story today. And as I do that, it's really important that this is as interactive as possible with a number of people on the line, and we're really keen to understand the questions you have about a measurement of coaching. And so if you have a question, we'd love to hear it. And in order to ask that, you'll notice that there's a question and answer facility in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. So simply type in the question. I will be looking at those as we go through this afternoon's webinar. And if it's immediately relevant to what we're talking about, I promise to ask it then. And if not, we'll come back to questions and answers and allow a chunk of time at the end to do that. And we intend to wrap up the whole of the webinar in 60 minutes this afternoon. So we'll be finished on the hour. So I know that, like me, I'm sure you're impatient to get into the story. However, ahead of that, I just want to set the scene for the approaches that Joe and Gregor will bring to life. And so I want to just say a bit about why coaching evaluation for us at the Oxford Group is so critical. Whether we're measuring management or leadership development or executive coaching, it's at the heart of what we do. Without robust measurement in place, it's difficult to know that the value we intended has been delivered, and it's difficult to know if we've made the difference we intended. And so whether or not in your organisations you have processes in place to do this, measuring the value of coaching is an integral part of our approach, as you'll see. And it's why organisations trust us, come back to us, and work with us. And we believe that the approach enriches the experience for everyone involved, and of course provides that vital and essential, valuable business case for coaching. So in order to really set the scene, you may be wondering how do we do it? So I guess we would as we've said, build a focus on measurement into coaching right from the very beginning, and I guess this splits into three parts. The early phase, the early parts, can be characterized by getting really clear on what the coaching is designed to achieve. So this involves taking and talking to HR, the boss and the coachee, about what the coaching is there to deliver, what value it will really add, how it will make a difference and impact both personally and organizationally. And we build on those initial conversations in chemistry and the initial coaching sessions to really distill as much clarity as possible about the coaching and what it's there to achieve, and also how we will measure that it's achieved that. And often, if not always, we involve key stakeholders in that conversation at the very early stage. That's often the boss, and it's a way of having some of those critical contracting conversations that both align and add to the objectives and measures, but also critically, as I'm sure will be in your minds, how we manage that delicate balance between coaching confidentiality and having some key, what we call content-free signposts in place, which allow everyone the confidence that the coaching is on track, because obviously what happens in the coaching is completely confidential. The middle phase, I guess I would call it, involves the coach and coachee working with some very specific measurement tools, which Joe and Gregor will illustrate. It involves capturing impacts as we go along regularly, but it involves a more formal midpoint review to make sure everything is on track and what we hoped would be achieved is on the way to being achieved. It also allows that valuable course correction if it's necessary. And then at the very final session, we have something incorporated that has a specific focus on coaching impact. This is called a measurable results discussion, and far from a form-filling or administrative exercise, this is really designed to help the coachee look back, acknowledge, celebrate, and plan for how they'll sustain the learning post-coaching. And Gregor and Joe will talk about this in more detail. And then the very final stage is that we have an independent quality manager who follows up with all coachees, and often with the line manager, to evaluate a number of key components of the coaching. This may be value, productivity, impact on performance, overall impact, and this results in a content-free report which is then shared with the sponsor, and we'll say some more about that as well. And finally, some organisations choose to invest in a much longer term impact review, some 6, 12, 18 months down the line, to continuously test the impact. But at last, to you, Joe, I'm sure that none of this was uppermost in your mind when we first spoke, and I remember taking your brief a few years back. So what I'd like you to do, firstly, is say just a little bit about QB to put the organisation into context, and then tell us what was on your mind when you spoke to me about coaching.
Okay. Well, obviously, we're for QBE, which is a large commercial insurer, one of the largest 20 globally. And at that time, I had the role of head of business practices. And this was quite a broad role, and it included providing a high level of business architecture as a function, as well as managing a business architecture team and business process teams. Personally as well, within that role, I managed high-profile business projects, many within the London market and Lloyd's itself. At that time, my line manager was seeing some behaviours that we both felt could be improved. I think the way I'd probably put it from my perspective is that I was starting to just sealing out in the organisation, and there was frustration creeping in, and I wasn't really sure how I could get to that next level.
Joe, if I can chip in,
sure.
When we met, you also had a bit of a reputation as a firebrand.
Yeah, I think, Greg, I think you're right. That's fair to say that. I mean, I didn't like it, but that actual firebrand bit was effective in some areas, and a lot of it was just misplaced passion. Really, I was determined to try and get the best result, and I didn't want to lose that passion, but I felt I needed to tame it somehow.
Yeah, and the other thing we discussed right at the start is you weren't too sure about what moving up to the next level would mean for you.
Yep.
I think at the time you were feeling that security was probably more important to you than promotion, but you also knew that your sponsor really expected to see some behavioural change.
Okay, so I'm hearing there are lots of possible areas to focus on. I also know that the coaching program was a relatively short one, so there were 4 sessions available to you, which is reasonably unusual given the content of coaching, which we'll come on to. So bearing in mind we're focusing on how you targeted outcomes and how you focused on impact throughout, Gregor, what role did you play as a coach in really ensuring that clarity was there from the very beginning?
Well, Lisa, you've talked about taking detailed briefs, and that's sort of not something I do, but it really helps set me up for the chemistry session. It helps me prepare the questions I have for the client, and of course, once I'm in the meeting, I have to meet them where they are, and as a person, start from there and build on that and what's important to them. So even before we formally start working together, I use the chemistry session to begin the process of getting real clarity about the outcomes. Then in the first session, I unashamedly structure the first session so we both get really clear on outcomes and measures of success. And most of the time, we also create a scorecard, which we use throughout the process.
Okay. Sorry, go on, Gregor.
I was going to say the scorecard approach doesn't always work for everyone, but I've found most clients really value the structure that it gives. Okay,
and to just demonstrate what that scorecard looks like, we're sharing one on screen. Now that isn't Joe's, but it's a useful example. And I just wondered if you can say a bit more. You said not everybody finds it useful, but help us understand how, when you do use it, how that works for you.
Yeah, I just noticed this was the scorecard. The scorecard you're showing, that was at the beginning of the process, and the scorecard at the end, the current scores had moved up dramatically from there. Yeah, so as I said, I'm very much in charge of the first session. But I set things up so that the coachee knows that for all the other sessions, I'll start with asking them what they want to get out of the session. Life and work happens in between the sessions, so there are often things that we come up with since the last session or critical incidents in the near future that completely change our priorities. So we have to be flexible, and the scorecard allows us to maintain an overall focus on the goals whilst enabling a lot of flexibility. And most of the time, the things that come up will have relevance to one or more of the work areas on our scorecard. So I guess the point is, it isn't a rigid process. It has to be owned by the coachee, but my role as a coach is to hold their overall focus.
Right.
And the other way I use a scorecard, it's counterintuitive, but before every session, I review the overall goals and prep myself to not go in and say, so these are the work areas, what do you want to work on? So that the client doesn't unconsciously close things down and restrict things. So I just keep the focus work areas in my head, and then as we deal with the immediate issues, I'll just chunk up from there, what's the consequence of that, what's the meaning, what purpose does that serve? And most of the time, what they bring in a moment relates to one of their goals. Or the chunking up might uncover a critical incident or an important goal we didn't uncover at the start, so that can go onto the scorecard. Some people aren't very good at defining what success looks like up front, and it's more of a process of discovery. And we'll start with generic areas such as communication skills or improving delegation until the real goals come clear. In Joe's case, however, it was pretty easy for him to be clear on what he wanted from me in the coaching process, and also what he didn't want.
Okay. So coming back to Joe, I like that sometimes it's easier to know what we don't want, and that helps us focus. So help us understand, Joe, what you wanted and how Gregor helped you to get even clearer on that, given that it was a short program.
Yeah, I think that Greg is right. I don't think I had complete clarity of what I wanted to achieve going in, but we managed to get to them very quickly in the first session and define them fairly quickly and fairly easily. I think one thing that really helped is Gregor chose the particular approach to suit my style, which helped me to get to there. Very much I'm project orientated in some of these areas, and we actually set the goals almost like a project goals, and I think that suited me really. As far as we wanted to achieve, I'd describe 4 key areas rather than goals themselves. I think overall I wanted to change my reputation, but within that there was probably 4 main areas. The first one, funnily enough, wasn't about me, but was about my teams, and I was very keen to develop my teams, both the people that reported into me directly, but also the people that are underneath them. And then within my business architecture role, I did want to address something that I've mentioned before, which is that reputation, as Gregor said, the firebrand sort of effect. Some sort of measurement of how effective I was being in that role. So how do I measure the success of what I was doing, certainly on an individual basis, and how I could better influence critical decisions for the business when I might not have the necessarily authority to make those decisions.
Okay. And so, Gregor, I'm curious if you did anything else in particular, anything else that was particularly useful for getting clarity of focus in that short space of time. Was there anything else that you did?
In this instance, the three-way meeting with Joe's boss, David, was really useful for getting shared clarity right up front, because thankfully he was very clear.
Okay, and is there anything that you do as a coach to make sure that meeting is as effective as possible? So I'm thinking about prep for the coachee, prep for the boss.
I want to make sure the coachee is completely comfortable with the process. Letting them know the basic questions I'll cover with both them and their boss. Such as, what do you want? What do you want Joe to get out of the coaching? What do you see as the positive strengths that he has to work on? So we're actually building on strengths. And I particularly want a boss to share what they appreciate about the coachee. Sometimes it's unsaid, but I definitely want a strengths-based approach as just a pure deficits-based approach. And I'll also confirm the consequences of things not shifting or changing, why coaching is important to the boss in the organisation, as well. And we're basically aiming to get a verbal commitment of what success looks like and where they're looking to see change. Okay,
so it's a real shared clarity of focus. And you've focused, and probably quite deliberately, on preparing the coachee. And I just want to mention that often we'll do the same with the boss if it's needed, so everyone's prepared to get the most productive conversation possible, because people at very senior levels, they've got very short time, and you want to get that really to the nub of it and get that conversation done at that very beginning and get it as focused as possible. So I'm just curious, Joe, as to what your experience of the three-way was.
Yeah, I think what was useful to me is just hearing it from David, who's my boss at the time, just understanding with clarity with a third party there. It's things we talked about on a general basis before, but just having that ability just to say these were the issues, and having a third party there just helped focus what we talked about in the past, really. Okay.
And I'm conscious it relates to a question that came in just a moment ago from Fred. He said, how do you deal with a situation where HR's objectives don't line up with that of what the coachee wants to get from it? And I guess you could say, how do you deal with a situation where the coachee and the line manager's objectives don't line up? So I guess, Gregor, you could say more to this as well, but we'd aim to avoid this by taking those detailed briefs and encouraging those conversations to take place before we even involve a coach, so that there is that clarity when you get, or more clarity when you get to this stage. So I guess this meeting between the three of you is, if there's still a lack of clarity, then these conversations are crucial at this stage.
Yeah, where you do have that disjoint, that's an opportunity for us to have a real dialogue and get some clear contracting within the organisation, as opposed to just between the organisation and us.
Yeah, it's the joining up. So I don't intend to review the whole programme, or even because you mentioned 4 areas, Joe. I don't intend to go through each of those, even though we may be curious to know more. What I'd like to focus on is what was most impactful about what Gregor did as a coach. So, and Gregor just interject as we go. So, Joe, what was most impactful?
Okay, I think 3 things really stand out for me, and it focused me right from the start, first session, on things. So focus on things that would give me the most payback and make the biggest impact. Firstly, we worked on how I set up for meetings. So one of the issues was in this firebrand issue that I had, how I presented myself.
I've lent on my. Sorry, Joe, I'm throwing you because I've lent on my keyboard and moved the slides on. So we're sorted.
Okay. No problems. So, as I say, it's how I set up for meetings, how I looked at emails. So I was looking at all encounters, whether personal or electronic, in a very narrow mindset of wanting to win, very binary, wanting to compete. And sometimes that would manifest itself in meetings physically. So, I'd be leaning forward, I'd be breathing fast, so it's very much a fight or flight sort of response. So Gregor helped me change my purpose from in those meetings to go more from a compete to collaboration, to break the physical reaction, so to look around, to lean back, slow breathing, etc. And I think once I did that, I really felt like I had more time in these situations. And when I did this, I was able to see things in a less binary manner, and then add some value to the choices or options that threw up. So, looking at certainly a wider brief of options.
The additional thing there, Joe, was also that gave you the capacity to listen, because you were really in tell mode, weren't you? You're much more in tell mode than being able to sit back and listen.
Absolutely, yeah, that was very much true.
And I kind of hear there, Gregor, making some choices to focus on what was absolutely going to give you the biggest impact, that then allowed you clearly to see that you got some momentum that you could build on in the work that you did together. So I'm struck, though, even just listening to you, you'd had a chemistry meeting, and this is your first meeting, how receptive you were to a change of approach so quickly, Joe. So what helped that being that receptive?
Yeah, I think I'd had a really good look at myself even before the coaching started. So, I wasn't comfortable with some of the behaviours, and going into the coaching, I'd sort of made a promise to myself to be as honest as possible, and I think that really helped. And I think that and sort of the view I'd had before going into the coaching really increased my self-awareness. And I think that made me very receptive, because I did want to change, and so wanted to shape how we worked on things and how we did things, because I wasn't trying to explain things away. I did want to make that change. Okay.
And we've had a question in from Michael, who's asking, was that behaviour based on observations or reflections? And I think what you're saying is there was something about you seeing that you needed to make a change, but you were also seeing you were getting some feedback clearly from the business and from your boss about how things were going.
Yeah, I think it was a bit of both. I mean, there was a level of self-frustration coming in. So I'd get very frustrated when I couldn't get the point across effectively. And I think that was matching up with what I was being told from my manager and others, and sort of trying to put those together, but not really knowing what I could do to solve it. And I think that's where I was.
Okay. And so Gregor chose, as you've already described, a heavily coaching with content approach right from the very beginning. So things that you could do, Joe, try out, experience, and clearly get some immediate results. And how did that then, Gregor, fit with this impact and outcomes you were aiming for?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. In terms of going through the scorecard approach and that exploration, going for the measures gives you an awful lot of clarity in terms of what's really important. So I'm not sure if that might have been part of the answer to the person's question. But I picked up pretty quickly on Joe's personality type, and I knew that. My intuition was having some frameworks to hang our work upon would be really important. And we've already touched upon, you've got a background in managing projects, so it made sense to treat the coaching like a project. Break the work into milestones, take one, work on it, suggest the most useful technique or tool, because there was some content needed, applying it, assessing the impact, and then joining up the overall learning and therefore value, which we'll come back to a little later.
Okay. And Joe, you said there were three things, so that's the first. What was the second area of most impact for you?
Yeah. As I said before, one of the issues that I was very interested in doing is the development of my own team. At the time, I didn't have a very large team, but they were very skilled and very focused. And I was doing a lot of delegation to them, but on reflection, it was very limited. So I was continually diving in when they hit problems, hit the rocks, and trying to fix problems. And I did think that was my part of my role, and it was a very helpful and positive thing when, in fact, as far as they were concerned, and to me as well, it was hugely negative. I realised that during the coaching session, helped by my awareness and trying to be honest, that it was a very negative thing that I was doing. So once I'd realised this, stepping away and not doing that was very challenging, very painful, if I'm being honest. I had to, instead of doing that, focus on giving them the skills to do what they needed to do and to step away, which was very hard for me. It didn't mean leaving them, but I needed to sort of step behind them and support them rather than step in front. So it was a different way, a different approach.
And as you say that, Joe, I feel your pain, or I hear your pain in your voice.
I still find it tricky now, but I'll still work on it.
I suspected that might be the case. And you talk about being pretty self-aware, and you clearly were, because you were really clear about how you wanted to focus the coaching. But despite that, there were still some blind spots. And so I'm just wondering, Gregor, what was most useful to help Joe see this and think and operate differently?
Yeah, building on Joe's courage to let go of, the thing that he'd relied on for so long, we needed to have something else to step into. And I decided to use MBTI from day one. A lot of what Joe wanted to work on was about communication. So I got Joe to work through the instrument, and actually he and I are very similar. And I know there's research to say that choosing a coach of a different personality can actually give better results. But Joe and I, being so similar, really helped me as a coach to see, I really got where he was coming from and what would be useful, to target first. And then Joe was then able to use his understanding of MBTI preferences to actively review how he worked with each of his 3 team members, because they were all very different from him and different in turn.
That's really true. It did give me a way of viewing of what their requirements were as well as me. One direct report in particular needed a lot more information from me. That I'm fairly intuitive, and I'll make big leaps and hunch-based approach, but she's very methodical, needed information, process it, and that was causing a lot of friction. And through this MBTI, I was able to encourage her to try and rely less on the detail. Like one of the bits we used was, rather than giving me long, word-based reports, convincing her to try and put it in PowerPoint, so she had to chunk up a little bit, and that helped. But probably what helped even more is me understanding why she needed to do that, and accepting that was the case, and sort of meeting her halfway. So not always expecting us to try and be intuitive, but at the same time, maybe taking in a bit of detail myself.
Okay. And again, I hear the stretch that you're you're describing. So what? Just because time is moving on, what was the final area, Joe?
Well, generally, and this is more of a personal bit, is I was doing a wide range of activity, especially into respective project, both within the company and in the market, and general troubleshooting. But I wasn't really tracking the value of the activities I was involved in. I was doing a lot of varied problem solving, but didn't know how much this saved or even made us in nearly all of the circumstances. And in the sessions, once we began talking about attaching a value to the activity, I was able to think about prioritising that activity to give us the best return.
Okay. And I'm really interested in hearing you say that, because there's a real parallel process to what we're talking about, this whole evaluating the impact. So, Gregor, do you want to say a bit more about that?
Yeah, I really encourage clients to think about value, in terms of how the coaching plays out in their bigger picture, in their context. So I challenged Joe on how his value was being measured, but not only by him, but particularly by David and other senior stakeholders. And it was unclear, and it often is. And so we began looking at how we quantify that, and where he was focusing, and what he could use, in and beyond the coaching.
Okay. So I think this really gets to the heart of what we're talking about this afternoon. So we've talked about getting the focus right and judiciously using content to create impact, but this is about how you, in this instance, really got Joe to quantify the coaching. And so I'm curious about how you did it with Joe and how you do it generally. So this is about bringing our process, even more to life, Gregor.
Yeah, sure. Well, by starting with the scorecard, we already had a basis for measuring impact, which we could review. Every session, as I said, we only had 4 sessions. Ideally, we have a quick review, at every session. The involvement and the viewpoint of the stakeholders and sponsors can be important, and then we often do review I do a midway review through the engagement. We didn't do in this case because we only had 4 engagements. And sometimes there might be a recent 360 we can build on, or sometimes we'll have a formal 360 engaged. It depends on the organizational setup. And of course, we capture measurable results formally at the end of the program. And when I first started doing this, I thought, oh, this is an admin overhead. This isn't something that's really going to work. But what I've found again and again, the coaches find it extremely valuable, and it does give that platform for the discussion. Where do you go from here? And then I also schedule a 6-month follow-up, and we review progress at that point. And Joe and I did this, and that was a really gratifying meeting. And it was a coffee and Cafe Nero, if I remember correctly. And he had some good news to share.
That's great. That's great. There's a couple of things that struck me there. One relates to a question that's come in from Sophie, and it feels pertinent to just mention this here. How do you balance having self-rating scores with real measures on the scorecard, Gregor? So is there any more you want to say in relation to that?
Yeah, it depends on the context of the coaching, but where I can, I will have a business measure. If there's a quantifiable business measure that we can use, we will use it. And often we might create a more intuitive score around just the general business. So to give you an example, working with a sales VP, I've done this several times. We created a measure like buzz. Measure buzz out of 10. So you walk on the sales floor. If buzz is 2, you've got a problem. If buzz is 9, you don't have a problem. And that's a nice leading edge indicator. And lots of business measures are the real trailing edge indicators. So if we can create something that really immediately gives us some insight into what's going on, that's great. We'll create that.
And I'm conscious that we use other measures such as pre and post 360. You mentioned that one. We use colleague opinion survey scores are ones that I've used in the past, pre-coaching, post-coaching, satisfaction scores. So some really hard measures versus more self-rating scores. So Joe's here saying how he felt himself, but then there would be a number of other scores that you could look to. Yeah. I was also particularly struck by your phrase, and I think it's a really honest phrase, and I've heard other coaches talk about this measurable results at the end being an admin overhead. It feels like something that perhaps the Oxford Group wanted to foist upon you, or the organisation foists upon you. What really pleases me is to hear how valuable that is, both to you as a coach, but also to Joe and coaches full stop, because that's my experience when I've done this with a coachee. I forget everything else. I just forget the work that person has done for themselves and where they've got to. So I'm sure you will agree with that, Joe.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah. So
go on.
No. I think it can be missed out, but it was incredibly important in my case, definitely.
And it brings me to the point of measuring impacts, and I'm sure, and everybody else listening, I'm sure is interested to know what the impacts were personally for you, but also for QBE, because we talked about how significant they were, Joe. We'll also look at what you've become aware of since, but at the end of that coaching, so when that closed, this at 6-8 months after beginning work with Gregor, what were you aware of initially?
So I think that there's been several things that came aware of. I mean, the first thing is moving from this competing to a collaborating mindset. So that was a big shift, and as you said before, it had to be a learned behaviour. It wasn't my natural way of doing it, but it's had huge payoffs. And one of the bits that impacted on that is that around 6 months after the coaching, I picked up quite a significant promotion to head of operations in European markets, and that was for the first time I had a senior role which included a sort of more of a BAU operational element, while still maintaining the troubleshooting elements across the organisation, which I really enjoyed and I still do now. Within that role, the collaboration piece that we've got really helped, because I mean, an example of that is within we have several offices around continental Europe, and they were operating to several different operating models. They had differences in processes, differences in systems, and that was costing us quite a significant amount of resource and cost generally. And what I tried to do was get them to change things, but to do it for themselves rather than trying to impose a change on them. So it was a bit of a bit more of a pull rather than a push, and that was something that directly came out of the coaching, I think. And so I knew what the efficient process would look like, but got them to build and own the operating model themselves. So that they had an identity with what they were building, so it wasn't coming from the head office. And again, using the bit we've used in the coaching. We tracked the benefits. So one of the measures we did was when we did this, we actually tracked by country what the impact was going to be, both from cost avoidance and savings that we've made. And that alone across the countries that we're in was in excess of 7 figures.
Yeah, and which what I thought when I heard that, I was clearly very chuffed. Even before this, during the 4 sessions, Joe had also identified thousands of pounds worth of savings from the way in which QBE collaborated with external organisations. It was a 6-figure saving on a major change programme where Joe was the business architect, and basically what had been going had been decisions had been put off for years. The people had just been going round and round in this pattern, and by successfully influencing, collaborating, those decisions got made. So I remember that distinctly.
Yeah, I mean, with that, there was just a lot of areas, and I think that goes back to where I was not owning the decision and being able to collaborate better and influence to be able to close down some of these, and yet they were in excess of 6 figures, and there was a few of them. I mean, another spin-off that came from the early stages or the early stages post-coaching is related definitely more towards the team-based and has grown since then, which has meant that I've been able to use the experience to mentor and coach others within the organisation.
And in so many coaching transitions, there's the challenge of letting go of something that you've got recognition and satisfaction from, and this Joe really had to do that here, and it was with real commitment. But the translation from a reputation of firebrand to someone who's really seen across the board of business as a great mentor and coach. I think that personally one of the biggest results, non-monetary results that I can see.
Yeah, and I think that one was the one that was probably least expected by me. I wasn't expecting to be in that mentor and coach role, and within the team itself, it actually made them more capable. The quality of work that they were able to do was driving up because I was trusting them more and empowering them and coaching them on. So they took on more work and actually took on more challenges within the teams themselves. I think my self-awareness increased, although I think we started at a good level, it did get worse. And what wasn't there before, that became clear immediately post-coaching, is the self-worth that I had, and I could actually put a value on that. And what I was capable of, or what I was aware of what I was capable of, was much wider than past what I thought before this. And the shift from that, sort of the wrong side of evangelistic firebrand to a valued sort of leader and contributor to the organisation change.
Fantastic. It sounds like one of you, I'm not sure which one, is next to a sort of rattling drain pipe. I'm not sure whether there's anything noisy in your backgrounds, but I just thought I'd warn both of you, because that's a list of phenomenal business and personal impacts, Joe, that you've just described. And I would hate for, as we just move on into the later benefits, for anyone to miss any of that fantastic stuff. So I'm not sure whether either of you are aware of anything that's making a particular noise.
I was muted, so it wasn't me.
Okay. All right.
I'll blame technology.
There we are. What what you both have talked to is phenomenal. And what I wanted to also draw attention to in the corner, and you're unable to read it quite deliberately, because this is a page from your evaluation, or the coaching evaluation that resulted from this assignment, Joe. So you've just summed up in your own words, as you would have in conversation with Gregor at the end of coaching. John, our quality manager, would have followed up, and that's a page, just one of the pages from the evaluation report. So what you see there is we're offering the coaching sponsor a information about the coaching in this particular page is business impact. So this was impact on productivity and performance, which you've described, and impact on clients, customers, colleague relationships, and you've also described that. And then so we score that, and it's a score that you give, and often we'll add to that a score from a third party. So if your line manager, for instance, which we didn't in this instance, and then we'll provide some quantitative information, which some of that you've talked to. So I just thought it was worth summarising what people are looking at there. So we've got the benefit with you both of following up this coaching probably a couple of years later. So a lot's happened, as you said, Gregor. Life happens in between, and I'm curious about what life has happened in between, Joe, for you, and what you've become aware of as continuing impacts, I guess I'd call them.
Well, biggest one, I'm still here.
Yeah.
And I think what else is just continuing to focus on what enabled me to make those changes. As I say, you do go into it with natural behaviour and you're altering that, and there's always a risk that you move back to that original behaviour. So you need to keep on reminding yourself of the new behaviours and make them muscle memory, and keep them so embedded that when you fall off that wagon, that it actually jars you back onto it. So you're very aware of what you're trying to do new, and make it not new, I suppose is the best way of describing it. It's also knowing when not to be too collaborative. So again, probably said earlier on, I did want to keep some of that passion and sort of maybe more directional, and just understanding when to use either style. So sometimes I do need to be a bit more direct and a bit more passionate, and then sometimes collaborative will be more appropriate, and it's not losing one skill at the using one skill at the cost of the other. Also, just realising how long it takes to lose a reputation. So that sort of firebrand reputation takes a long time to go away. To the point where some people who I don't have much contact with might still feel that way. So just realising how long that sort of stuff stays with you. And I suppose overall it's just made me aware of what I am capable of. I think that's the main piece.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, thank you both. I'm going to draw my personal questions to a close there, and really just summarise before I get into a number of the questions that have come in from people as we've been on there. Some of them we've asked as we've gone along, and some of them we'll come back to. So, given time, I think it's worth just summarising. Yeah, executive coaching, we fundamentally believe it's worth it, and I think your story clearly illustrates exactly what can come from coaching and how we can give ourselves the very best chance of capturing those impacts right from the very beginning. And we do that by building in a really clear focus on outcomes and measures. And as you've said, Gregor, and as you know, Joe, sometimes that's hard. It's not the easiest thing. Sometimes beginning with the end in mind is tricky because we just cannot envisage where we'll end up. And I guess if I was to ask you to honestly say, Joe, at the beginning you didn't have any idea that where you would be is X, Y, and Z at the end of it. And we'll do anything we can as coaches and as the organisation managing that coaching to get that clarity, that alignment. And we do that in a number of ways, many of which we've described, and the 3 ways are really, really important part of that. We create a personal scorecard, and there's a number of questions about the scorecard which we'll come back to in just a moment, to capture those outcomes and those measures. As you've mentioned, Gregor, the scorecard we shared was a before scorecard, and often we'll get to the end of coaching and the scorecard will have hugely moved, and will have shifted and changed shape as we've gone. And that provides a great way of reflecting impact back to the organisation if the coachee is prepared to share it.
Actually, I was going to chip in. The measurable impact on that particular engagement was that they were 6 months ahead of schedule on a major strategic project, and they had released, to quote directly, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, in additional value.
Fantastic. And we'll maximise impact through, as you've talked to today, focusing on those areas. There's so much we could focus on, but really distilling down what's going to make the biggest impact, and then using content really, really carefully to make sure it really accelerates the coachee's learning and leaves you with those. You've talked, Joe, today about the tools and techniques you still employ. And when I met you just recently, you went very, very easily without any reminder into the things that have really stuck with you and that you're still using. And we get you to track the results. So this is about you seeing the shift, so that we then can follow up and do that content-free evaluation, which enables us to share back the impacts of the coaching without going into the content, the private content of the coaching. So I have asked all the questions, and there have been a number coming in. There's a question from Anna-Leah that's really interesting, given the focus of our conversation this afternoon, and she's asked, how would you quantify how much time you spent on coaching and how much time you spent on measurement? So we've really focused on the measurement angle, but there's clearly a huge amount of coaching. So if I ask you, I guess, Gregor, I'm going to ask you first, your sense of that, and then I'll ask you, Joe.
My first instinct was to say, just thinking of it as an overhead, it was less than 5%. But actually, when I think about it more deeply, it's more than that, because it is you are integrating measurement into the coaching as you go along. So I wouldn't actually look at it as a binary thing between measurement and coaching. Probably on the pure measurement piece, it's less than 5%. But actually, you are measuring and testing testing with them how they are measuring their success and their strengths, etc., as you go through the process. So I think it's actually quite pervasive.
Mm. Yeah, I think for me it was almost like a feedback loop. They don't separate out easily. We would try some things because we had them sessions fairly widely apart, so I could go out and try some things and then evaluate how effective they've been, and then you'd bring that back into the next coaching session. So your measurement was part of the loop that you'd bring back into the next session. So it's almost part of the coaching itself.
And I'm thinking it's human nature to want to see the shift that we're making. So if any of those of us listening who've ever been on a diet, I mean, measurement becomes integral to our daily life. Getting on the scales, trying on a pair of jeans that we might not have been able to fit in. We're testing the impact of the effort we're making, and coaching does take effort. Making a change takes an effort, and we want to see it. So it becomes a natural way of spurring us on, I guess. There was this question about the scorecard that came in from Michael quite early on. We'd moved on, and so it didn't feel right to stop the conversation in flow, but it's a really useful question about the transferability of the scorecard from being something to use one-on-one to being transferable into a team context, so maybe using a team scorecard for senior and executive coaching. I mean, I've got a view on that. Gregor, have you anything you want to share from your own experience?
I see the scorecard being even more important in that context. I mean, most senior teams will have some sort of form of charter, and that, in essence, is a form of scorecard. But the benefit of using a scorecard in a team coaching environment is you surface the differences of opinion and perceptions around, how much are we inquiring, how much are we listening. If you take it down to some basic behaviours, good behaviours you see in teams, and then suddenly you get this disparity, and there's actually a disconnect. And so a scorecard in a team coaching environment is a really connecting vehicle, and high team performance is a lot about connectivity.
And taking that question from a slightly different angle, I've seen senior executives take their own scorecard. So Joe, you had a scorecard in this context. We didn't actually share your particular scorecard, but I've seen coaches take the scorecard and share it with their senior team, and almost use it as another way of getting some feedback and rating themselves. And I've also seen them use it and introduce it into a team environment to create their own team scorecard. So almost taking what they've learned from coaching and applying it in their own right without a coach. So I think there's huge benefits to be had from using it as a tool. A question which we might have expected to get from Rupert, which is, how did you determine what results came from coaching and what would have happened anyway? How scientific can you be in assigning results directly to coaching? So it's the killer question, really. What would it have happened anyway, Joe? I'm going to ask you, Joe, because it's you.
Yeah, I think so. To take the bits that are pulled out, the measurement of it, I think, never would have happened naturally. So measuring the impact, I think I still would have been making impacts, but I don't think I'd ever started measuring them to that level. I think the bit that probably wouldn't happen, you can never be sure, but that probably wouldn't be happened is the fundamental change in behaviours. So that shift from collaborative, to collaborative from confrontational, because I was having success being confrontational, and I probably would have continued, but never been as successful as I could have been, because I was, my instincts were fairly good. I was making the right calls, but I probably wasn't just, making everyone happy doing it that way. So making that shift probably wouldn't have been a natural one. I'd say that's the main one that came out of the coaching, is that shift to be able to retain some of that, but also move to a more collaborative nature to when it wasn't appropriate.
And Gregor, am I hearing you itching to also respond?
Oh, no, I suppose not itching. It's one of those questions where you say it depends. When I've been involved in coaching where, my sense is this individual, especially if you're thinking about like a transition, you put it down to like a simple transition from somebody going from a subject matter expert to a line manager, or a manager to a manager of a function, that actually they'll get a shift in their identity, and that confidence around that role. They will get there. It might take them 18 months or 2 years, but they're generally going to get there. So the coaching is an acceleration vehicle. But there are other areas where, depending on the situation, that will not be the shift, or it may take 10 years to achieve the shift. So I think it does depend on the context. I mean, the coaching session I had this morning, just the ability of the coach to reflect in a certain way can really, really change a coachee's perceptions, of the situation, and you can, change patterns of behaviour that have been there for 25 years. They're there because they've worked for 25 years, but they need a bit of a challenge to shift. And I think in those situations, and again, that becomes even more important when you're looking at really senior executives, because they're already successful. They're already very smart. They're probably successful in spite of what they do rather than because of what they do. And so they need some extra assistance in the coaching to deal with those in spite of behaviours to be even better.
Okay, thank you. And we've time for, just as I promised, to wrap up before the hour. Just one more question, and this question comes in from Bertram, and it's how do you move from the scorecard to having a report that goes to the sponsor of coaching to show what the return on investment is? So that's the first part of his question. And then the second part is, do you produce formal reports, and do you routinely include the financial payback you have achieved as a coaching supplier? So I guess I'll answer this one. The second question, do you produce formal reports? Well, the answer is yes. And we've showed a couple of pages from that formal report, although it's bigger than what we've described. And always, if we can, we will include financial measures. So in this particular instance, you guys were able to distill this down into some metrics which we were able to share with the organisation. We've described it today as savings in excess of 6 or 7 figures. But it will also include, other data as well as metrics, as well as the financials. And the metrics relate back to the first part of the question, which is how do you move from the scorecard to sharing with the sponsor the ROI. So a coachee may not always want to share their scorecard directly with the organisation, but we would encourage them where they felt where they felt it was appropriate to share some of the metrics and some of the movements as percentages. So, I mean, Joe talked about his team, maybe talking about the effect of his team moving from one percentage to another as a result of the coaching might be one descriptor we might use. So we encourage the scorecard to be used, but we wouldn't force it to be used, because often there are elements in that scorecard which are private and personal and confidential to the coaching. I don't know whether you want to say any more about that, Greg, or if anything's come to mind as I've been answering those two questions.
I think the other thing that's important to point out is that the quality audit, in terms of the generation of the report that can go to the organisation, is done by someone who's independent, and basically they're measuring the quality of the coaching process. So whereas the measurable results discussion is we are evaluating the success of the process, the independent audit is also assessing me as a coach as well. So I'm getting feedback on me and my coaching and the organisation's capability. So that's part of that report, so they can, the client can see the quality of the service as well as the results.
It's a fantastic joining up point that you make, Gregor, because we talked about, I said at the very beginning, we fundamentally believe that this enriches the experience for everyone, and this report isn't just for the organisation. It's for us. It's for you as a coach. It's about continuing your learning, celebrating the shift that you've helped somebody to make. It's so much. It provides so much more than just a tick box. Just yes, the coaching's done and it's delivered. Move on. It's very rich. So I'm mindful of the time, and I promised to finish within the 60 minutes. So I want to thank you both for not just for answering my questions, but for answering the questions that have come in ad hoc this afternoon, and for sharing your story, which so enriches I think everyone's understanding of coaching and the value that it can bring, and how you can describe that and demonstrate that back without, far from detracting, really, really positively impacting on the coaching. So I want to thank you both. And I just want to say a couple of things in closing. Firstly, that over the next couple of days you'll be sent all of you listening will be sent a short feedback questionnaire to complete, and we'd really ask you to complete that and send us back your feedback, because it's so valuable to us in planning future webinars and future activities. And we'll also in return send a copy of the slides. And all that remains for me to say is that on screen are some details if you'd like to contact me for further information about the executive coaching practice and anything else that we do, and also our website where you can find more information about the whole of the services that the Oxford Group provides, and also our Twitter account where you can follow us. So I just want to thank you all for listening, and most importantly, I want to thank you, Joe, for being prepared to share your story, which is a real personal one, and Gregor, for you sharing your experience as a coach. So thank you both.
No, you're welcome. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.